Next week on July 16, I'm going to be speaking at the VA Department of Defense Veteran Suicide Conference in Portland, Oregon. Now, as a Vietnam veteran, let me tell you why I wanted to do this. A major, yet very preventable health problem in the United States is suicide. Sadly, veterans comprise nearly a quarter of the suicide deaths in the United States. VA estimates anywhere between 18 to 22 veterans commit suicide each day or die from suicide. You don't commit suicide, you die from suicide. This means approximately 8,030 veterans die through self-inflicted wounds each year. We need to do more than say thank you for your service. Find a way, find any way to get involved to help a veteran transition into a meaningful life. Well, my guest today, Samantha Szlembarski. She is better known as Sam Ski, if you can't pronounce her last name. And she is an Iraq combat veteran. She's dedicated her life to reduce and hopefully prevent veteran suicide. She works for the VA in Iowa as a suicide case manager. Let's meet her. Sam, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. Great introduction.
Well, thank you. I'm really impressed with what you have. Sam and I spoke a couple weeks earlier, and we got some background on each other. So share a little bit about your background, what you growing up, and your decision that you made to join the Army. How did all that come about?
Okay. As you said, grew up in the Midwest. I'm second oldest of 5 girls. So I was the tomboy of the bunch. And so at a very young age, I really was very much into competitive sports. High school, I was in cross country, track, soccer. Always looked forward to when the military came to our PT or gym, however you say it around the United States. And so it was a great way for me to measure. And I usually measured myself against the boys in the class, how many push-ups I could do, how fast I could run, how many sit-ups. And they used to bring like rappel ropes and stuff like that. And so it was fun to play. I got really into women-led military movies like Private Benjamin, G.I. Jane. Those are usually the classics for a lot of women that are like, yeah, they're badass, I'm going to be like that. And so I was a little insecure about my knowledge base. Since I'd been to 13 schools, like I've been to schools where I learned long division, and then at other schools that were at a different rate for math. So I was rather insecure with my knowledge base for reading and writing, especially as a dyslexic person. So I thought I could, not then thinking about it, but now thinking compensate for having a career in service because I loved it. I loved the teamwork about it, the competitive nature. I was pretty physically fit and active as a kid. So it really drew me into going in the service and scored decent enough on the ASVAB where they're like, hey, we got a couple options here for you. And I was like, those sound really awesome. So went into the service, enlisted as a human intelligence collector, kind of the friendlier and kinder version of what we now know, or what was known as an interrogator. So they changed the 97 Echo series to a 35 Mike. So the short name is called HUMINT. So I went to interrogation school and source operations. It's a blended school in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Beautiful area, wonderful space. Had a great time there. And shortly after I finished with my AIT, Advanced Individual Training, my unit was already put on alert to mobilize. So we went to Iraq. It was within a year of being in basic training, AIT, I was already in a war zone. So it was kind of a shock. It was like, wow, I did not expect this to happen so quickly. So started there while I was in Iraq in 2008. My unit was going to be a part of a Marine base, Camp Ramadi, and we were supposed to be the security, the assessors, the vetters of locals, the local Iraqis coming in to be a part of the TIFRIC that we were building there. It was essentially a reintegration facility to assess and vet to make sure we were getting biometrics of folks that were coming in to make sure they were good guys, not bad guys. Not long into it, we did get a 2-ton truck that came through, blew one of our gates open, and 2 amazing Marines died that day. Lance Corporal Hayter and Corporal Yale, April 22nd, so Earth Day. I remember that day, very vivid. Stayed there for a brief moment. I was reassigned to go as what they called a COIN agent, a counterinsurgency agent, to work in detention operations at Camp Cropper. A lot of people may know that because that's where Saddam Hussein was placed. He was there as a high value target, HVT, as we call that. So he wasn't there when I was there, but we had a couple investigations happening at the time that I got to assist with, kind of grooming through files just to make sure everything we did on our end was appropriate and to the level of law and warfare. So in my time there as a COIN agent, also a human, I had an amazing opportunity to interact with detainees, and my role was to assess and identify any actionable intelligence, which means stuff that's not old or outdated, which is still valuable to understand tactics, techniques, and procedures of enemy combatants, but to find those that are hiding within a different name or an alias that were trying to stay under the radar so they weren't going to get accounted for their actual crimes. So I had a great opportunity with that. I love the experience. Yeah, we'll go there.
Wow. That is quite a story. When Sam shared that with me a few weeks ago, I was just mesmerized by it. It's like, wow. Now, when you were deployed, let's step back here. You were deployed. What was it like being a woman in the war zone? We don't hear from too many women in war zones.
Very true. So I was the only female humans in both the units I worked for, mostly men, either married. It was like kind of a married, quite, like in their mid-30s to late 30s, or mid-20s, very single, very bachelor. So it was a fun dynamic. At one coin or one turn of the coin, they treated me like a sister. Other turn of the coin, I felt like I had to compensate for being a woman. I would say that there were 3 different facets as a woman deployed you have to consider. One would be you're a woman, so immediately there, whether it's subconscious or conscious, there is a sense of misogyny. A lot of your leadership is men. The most senior woman we had in our unit was a staff sergeant, very well respected, and just a phenomenal woman in general. So yeah, you had to prove your worth, whether that is working longer hours or just always having that constant awareness you're having to perform as though you have something that is not as respected from your male counterparts. So the other facet is getting respect from our local Iraq security guards inside the facility. So for me, as a woman, I would go into the facilities. We had zones. So I worked with the moderate component of the detainees, essentially. That would be going to make conversations where the detainees that are in those zones, they elect their own type of leadership, they call them chiefs. And so I would interact with them daily, but then behind that, I would be able to kind of have sources within there that would share information of what's going on. What are the safety concerns? What are the things that they're talking about that we aren't seeing? I was a good barometer to assess if a incoming detainee was tech-feary or moderate. What I mean by that is we did have some foreign fighters. So whether they were from various countries and they were trying to say they're Iraqi, and we would learn just by me going in, hi, my name is Sam. I wore civilians. I didn't have a uniform. We did that intentionally. So going in, interacting, hi, my name is Sam. And if they just looked over, they turned their back on me, would not shake my hand, it was a good indication that they were Takfiri. Takfiri, sect of Islam, the Sunni sect of Islam. They're more the radicals. A good comparison is to say like a radical Amish person.
Mhm.
Oh, I might get some heat from some people listening to that from
That's all right.
the future, but that's fine. Basically, they lived like Muhammad did. So they wouldn't drink cold water. They didn't believe in electricity. They lived as the Prophet Muhammad did. And that was their staple, that was their standard. Rather, moderates, these were people that essentially couldn't afford living in Iraq during the invasion. They probably weren't a part of the Ba'ath Party, and the Ba'ath Party is kind of an elite club of individuals that worked with Saddam Hussein. So they just, a lot of those folks pieced out, had an education, could afford it. So the barrier was being able to afford to stay there, or join an insurgency, and they were just a victim of their circumstances, digging a hole in the ground and putting a bomb in there, and maybe not even being acknowledged that they were doing that.
Mhm.
So a great approach for me as a woman, I could talk about circumstances that my male counterparts couldn't. It was culturally inappropriate for a male to talk about a family. I mean,
Mm.
imagine you're in another country and a man that you don't even know is like, hey, how's your wife doing? How's your kids doing? It's very insulting. So me as a woman, I have nothing to gain. I'm not trying to establish myself in a masculine dominant role. So I would put thoughtful questions in their head like, do you have sons? Do you have a family? Who's out there that's missing you right now? And just plant that seed of, okay, you did this thing, I got it. I don't want to think more about that, but what you're deciding to do and who you're trying to protect, is it helping your family? Is it affecting your family? There's not a male role model in your family. Who's compensating for that void? And so it was a brilliant way for me, hindsight, to really interact with them on a different level than my male counterparts. Obviously, I'm 5'2", a $120 at the time, very petite. So me coming in yelling at somebody that's probably 2 times my size is not the most ideal way to have a conversation. So, and that's really what interrogation or interviewing or doing any source operations is, taking those bias, removing them, and trying to see the person and seeing if there's something that can stick where you can have that engagement. You find what their incentive is. That could be the love of their family or pride for their country. Do you want to make this country better? You didn't like it with Saddam Hussein? Cool. Let's talk about how you could be a part of making that difference.
Wow. The thing with the woman and the man asking for family, now, way before you were deployed and I was in the high-tech world, I went to the Middle East in business, and the State Department would brief you before you would go, right? And the State Department would say, don't acknowledge the woman if she's there. Don't shake the woman's hand. Don't reach out, shake the man's hand unless he offers it first. Do not make comments about their family. Do not say anything about their wife, their children, nothing. Just play off of what they play with, right? So that's amazing that you were able to break down that barrier, because when I would go, and again, I wasn't in a war zone at the time either. I was a businessman. They would clam up. They weren't going to talk. Wow. So when you're collecting this information, right? And we all watch movies, and you hear people trying to give you false information. How do you confirm what the information you're getting is valid?
So what we have, and this is all in the open Army interrogation manual, so nothing I'm sharing is classified. It's called controlled and repeat questions. So one way we can confirm a person's age, but technically they don't have an age. They do have an age, obviously, but they don't have birth dates. They don't really acknowledge it like we do in the Western culture. But just as an example, not a realistic example in that circumstance, but you'll get the point. We can say, so when were you born? And someone could probably say January 1st, 1978. Okay. So we got that. We established some information. How we're going to question and find that is, say they have an older brother. How old's your brother? Oh, he's about, I don't know, whatever age is older than 78. And you could say, well, how many years older is your brother? And so there's a clever way of eliciting your information to confirm that question. So we had the control question, and now we're doing a repeat question, but you're doing it in a different format. So it doesn't, so if someone's lying, it's going to take them a little bit longer to recall. Like, I'm the second oldest of 5 girls. I know my sister's birthday, and I know how much older by the month she is to me. That may, depending if someone has that close connection or relationship with their family, that can have an effect. So you would do different ways to ask a person, like in the Western world, when did you graduate high school? So there's a control repeat questions to make sure you're validating that information. Another way is if we know information, like I knew there was a guy with a different name because one source told me this information. So you could use this other source that you've vetted to see if that information is accurate. You know this information to be true, so you can go to this other person, and that's a good way to vet them with the reliability. So there's clever ways of doing it. It's just kind of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you get you leave the military, and now you're a social worker. So how does being an interrogator, how is that helping you with your transition, and how is it helping you now in your career?
Let me step back a little. So
Sure.
I went to the University of Iowa, got my undergrad in political science and a minor in history, like international relations. I loved it. I've traveled the world before I, joined the Army. And so my intent after my time in Iraq, I'd been approached by a couple agencies. Hey, do you have your bachelor's? Do you have your bachelor's? No, I don't. So, and this was during 2008. There was a government freeze. So it was like, it was kind of it was favoring employers versus employees. So you had to have more yourself on that cutting edge to be acknowledged. So I already had my top secret. So I was like, I'm just going to get all this basic knowledge on foreign affairs. I took every course I could about Middle Eastern relations and even, some in Asia as well. So I got that advantage. And so my intent during school was to go to the intelligence. PTSD did a little kind of a trick thing on me. I don't like big towns. It's kind of affect large populations. I worked in a prison in Iraq. So pause on that. So while I was working as a kind of an officer manager at the University of Iowa at our VA student kind of lounge, I learned that I had more passion to like, oh, you don't know about your GA benefits. Let me help you with that. Oh, you don't know who to go to about this. Well, did you know this? Did you know this? This is who you need to contact. And so it really opened up, like I had a passion to help my fellow comrades, just even as a troop, I did that all the time. When I had a minimal soldiers underneath me for my responsibility. So that I already had a baseline with, I already had a passion and talking to a lot of veterans on various subjects to get the resources or just listening and letting them air their grievances. So spent some time in Afghanistan, worked with a couple special forces organizations there, had the time of my life. It was just amazing. Came back, did some interviews, PTSD, it was just bad. So went to what we have here is called an Iowa Workforce Development, and they have a veteran representative. That person said, well, you have a service connection. Why don't you go back to school? Have you thought of social work? I was like, well, I was in foster care. So I'm like, what, take kids away? Hell no, I don't take kids away. No, the VA is the largest employer of social workers. I was like, are you kidding me? So I did an informational interview, which I always recommend if you're looking for a career path, find somebody, ask them all your questions, invest that time before you put money into going to school. And then you realize, yeah, that was dumb. Now what do I do with this degree? Anyway, so I talked, met with who now is my supervisor, Robert Otto, but he was a psychotherapist at the time. And it was just a brilliant experience, very informative. So it's like, okay, this is what social worker is as it relates to being, working with the VA. So interrogator, social worker, trying to get information from bad guys, trying to get information to good guys. I think the quality in that is I can be uncomfortable, or I can be comfortable in the uncomfortable interactions. More importantly, I know how to do the follow-up questions, and I'm not trying to do that with the intent, aha, you're wrong. Because really, as a social worker, you want to be there for your client. You want to be present. You're helping them identify goals to improve themselves. So I knew how to ask more questions and details to see what we needed to work on. So the being trained to ask the questions and knowing how to get people to talk with you, and it's not like from a manipulative perspective, but it's in this perspective is it's like your heart's in a way to help somebody. So doing the follow-up questions. So when you say this, what do you mean by that? Help me understand, explore more of that. But what else? What else? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think would be important to share right now? Some of that you learn while you're learning to be a therapist, because social workers are therapists. We're just kind of we wear many hats, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah.
It's incredible because I was a mentor with the Veteran Treatment Court, and I talked with some of the people that I was a mentor to, would talk to the counselors at the VA. They weren't veterans, but they were counselors, right? So they get the job at the VA. And they said, I'm getting nowhere. I mean, nothing's happening. They would come to court and say, he's not cooperating or she's not cooperating. And the judge, who was a JAG officer in the Marines, said, I'm reassigning to a veteran counselor. And it was, Sam, it was like a 180-degree difference. Veteran talking to a veteran. Some veterans don't want to talk to women because they still got that macho bullshit thing going, right? But you're a veteran and you served and you're a combat veteran. Did that make it more palatable for them to open up to you? Okay.
This would be a good point in saying, disclaimer, yes, I work as a VA as a social worker, not representing the VA in this capacity. So everything I'm sharing is my training, education, life experience. That being said, I have found, whether I'm a social worker at the VA or just out and about, and I see someone and I know that they're a veteran, the engagement is different for sure. I've had referral calls from the Veterans Crisis Line that they just want to talk with a veteran. And they're just more comfortable sharing their experiences and processing it with a combat veteran, rather than maybe someone that they would be worried would judge them.
Yes.
I will say that a good analogy I've heard is, if you're going to have heart surgery, you want to have the best person cutting you open and doing this stuff. Now, I've had my supervisor give this analogy to a veteran. Look, listen, yes, I'm a veteran, but I'm probably not the best fit for you. I'm happy. We'll see where we're going here. But this analogy with the heart surgery, would you rather have the expert open your heart, or would you rather have someone, they're pretty good at their job, great, but they're a veteran? It wouldn't matter in that circumstance.
Right.
So sometimes it works. And for me, when they're the reason that they're calling and they've been triggered because it's a memory date of a buddy that died, or an experience they had in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever they've had their deployment, I'm able to sit and be present, acknowledge them just like my counterparts, but they have that sense of comfort knowing she's been to Iraq and she's worked with people in Afghanistan that have seen the stuff. So it does have an advantage. I don't want to say it makes me a better social worker, but for some veterans, they open up quicker with me, and their engagement is more comfortable. The guard is down a little bit. They don't have to take time to educate me on terminology. When I came home from Iraq, I suffered from PTSD. My first experience with a therapist was very difficult. I had this is very earlier, so I don't know if this therapist intended to do it, but she essentially stated, but you're a woman, you weren't on the front lines. And back then I had a little bit more of a temper than I do now. I understand how to regulate it better. But I basically said, how would you know? What are front lines? And then I was like, you've seen too many World War II movies, and you need to be educated what the war, what combat looks like now. Like we've got enemy combatants that are coming up and are suicide bombers. They're bombing inside our camps. Like that probably was circumstances getting bombed in your camp, you know, in other campaigns, but the aspect of her statement was ignorant. Like I didn't get to work directly with Marines as a human, as a female, but they always inquired if we had a high value target woman, could you come in and talk with her? Because Marines at the time when I deployed in 2008, a human role a woman could not have because it was considered a combat position.
Correct.
Now we've evolved a little bit to offer positions that are considered frontline or combat infantry roles. Women are now capable to prove themselves just as our male counterparts. So
exactly.
Yeah, it kind of was a thing where going back into it, I do have a baseline. Again, I've worked with the Army. I'm familiar with the Marines. But having that baseline when they're talking about a FOB, when they're talking about incoming indirect fire or my squad, and I'm a specialist or I'm a captain at this, I understand what the role and responsibility is. It's easier for me to connect those dots. So that barrier of having to educate the person before they have that information. But I will say a lot of my counterparts that aren't veterans themselves, they absolutely do come to me. They do want to interact with me. They want to learn. And so we do have a lot of education for non-veterans that come in at the VA. And even at that, I have great former cohorts that are in the private sector doing therapy. And they're like, hey, I'm talking with a spouse right now, and their significant other is a veteran. Help me understand. Could you give me the cultural understanding of this and that? Like as social workers, it's a part of our competency to be familiar with many different groups of individuals. So we understand where our biases may be and where we can refine our competencies essentially. So.
Wow. The PTSD, let's touch on that for a second.
Yeah.
So many people, non-veterans, assume it would have to be a car backfiring or a car accident or explosion or something. That's what triggers PTSD. And how, you know, there's nothing. You're in a restaurant. How do you get PTSD in a restaurant? What are some of the other things that can trigger?
Sure. So I like to talk about PTSD as it relates to 5 senses or a situation. Like it could be a person, place, thing, a time, a smell, a sound, a touch, something that you taste. Like for me, I don't like fireworks. I've been around way too much loud noises, indirect fire in my exposure and experience, and I can't stand the smell of hand sanitizer. Had hand sanitizer every day in the detainee facility, and that was really hard for me to cope with when the pandemic hit in 2020.
Yes.
I used hand sanitizer all the time, talking with people. Like it just brought me back to a place. So as it relates to like restaurants, a lot of veterans, we are trained to be situationally aware at all times, knowing where the exits are, and never having our back exposed to a vulnerable position. So in those circumstances, you want to put yourself in the best position. Well, maybe that's not the case. So now you have a booth and only where you could sit is with your back against a glass window. So you can't see who's coming and going. So I don't think it makes us any less of a person to experience. I think that if you're having questions about PTSD, there's thoughtful ways to ask someone that has it. Like, what about this circumstance? Help me understand how I could better assist you. Like my partner, when we started a first date, I told her, like, look, when we go in restaurants, I feel most comfortable with my back against a wall and I could see everything and I could see where exits are. She respected that and understood it. You know, for some people, they don't know that about themselves yet. Maybe they've lived in this fight or flight circumstance and they're not understanding how to articulate it. And so this is where stepping back, just making a journal, like the first almost year I came back, I thought I had memory problems while I was going into these large lecture halls because I couldn't focus. Turns out it was PTSD. I was just so situationally aware. I didn't like people behind me. People are slamming their books closed. And I'm thinking, man, I'm having memory problems. That wasn't the case at all. So I didn't know that about myself. I didn't have that education. I didn't have that familiarity with it before. And so it could come out in different ways. Like I said, smells, it could be a person, it could be a tone of voice. And, you know, PTSD really can heighten that stress or anxiety level very quickly without a person being aware until probably it's too late. And that takes some training, like just like in the service, you learn how to be situationally aware. Some people say mindfulness. I like to say self-awareness. It's a better terminology for veterans. It's like, you knew when you first came in the military, don't touch your face, right? You got to break that habit. Well, you know, you don't know unless a drill sergeant's yelling at you like, hey, what are you doing? Picking your face? Stop it. You know, you're a professional. Don't touch your face. That's how you get sick. And not trying to compare that to PTSD, of course, but it's just that reminder. Maybe it could be a friend you're out with. It's like, hey, are you okay? You look a little on edge. Maybe don't use that terminology.
Yeah.
A little alert. You look like you're uncomfortable. What can I do to help you? And that might be, hey, if you're in a crowd, let's go in the outskirts. Let's go in a corner where you can visually see everything better. And acknowledge that, hey, you're doing great right now. Thank you for letting me know. So it could be different kind of educating people, but also being more comfortable, if you can, with either it's a spouse or it's a friend, a significant other, a sibling. Hey man, you're kind of rocking a little bit. Are you okay? And it may not be PTSD. It could be different things too. So it's always thoughtful to engage the person, ask them, what do you need right now? Do you want to talk about it? For me, if I'm getting fidgety in a big crowd, I don't want to talk about it because I'm already overstimulated. Just say,
Exactly.
let's
Go over here.
let's go to the restroom really quick. Let's go walk around a little bit, you know, and then that could be a way of removing them and having that conversation.
Absolutely. When I got out in the 70s, it didn't acknowledge PTSD even existed. And still a lot of veterans, when I was at the treatment court, still think it's a sign of weakness. They still deny it. I can work through it.
Yep.
And if you don't handle that trigger, it escalates. You said to me one time there was a time factor with a potential suicide. Talk about that.
Okay, so we're transitioning from PTSD to suicide. Sometimes an episode of PTSD could trigger a lot of emotions, what could lead into a crisis with possibility of suicide. So there's a study that had been done in 2005. I believe the title was Characteristics of Suicide Attempts and Attempters. And what we found was the impulse to do or have that plan and move forward with the intent of suicide, it's about an hour. And so statistically, 71% of suicides, they occur within an hour time frame. And so what we are trying to do is educate people like when that moment happens. We want to try to do it beforehand, but in that magic, I don't want to say magical hour, that was a bad term, but in that moment, you want to have a plan. part of that is becoming more aware of what those triggers are that are leading to it. And we want to say, for lethal means purposes, having lockbox for medications, removing a magazine and bullets from where a weapon is stored. Want to respect, you know, veterans
Absolutely.
are more likely to have weapons. We're comfortable with them. I enjoy them. They're recreational. Some people use them for protective purposes. I respect that. We want to be veteran-centered when we have a discussion about engaging with somebody that may have lethal means, and lethal means are firearms, are medications. And so when we have those conversations, it's just, we don't want to take that right away from you. We want to make sure that when you're having that moment, that there's a plan already for you to slow down your thought process, so you don't become a statistic. We want you to get that health care that you need, that attention. It could be a friend. It could be any facets. And I'm a big advocate of 988 press 1. It's the Veterans Crisis Line. We found that there's an increase of calls with the 988 feature, pressing 1 for veteran. And the old number is still relevant. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but we've also changed the name from Veterans Suicide Hotline to Veterans Crisis Line. Not all crises are the same. Not all crises will lead to suicide, but we know that it is a risk factor. Risk factors are probably legal problems, probably income. It could be not having access to health care, mental health care, not having a strong support network. So we want to counteract those with getting mental health care access, with having a list of friends that you could talk to in those moments, calling the Veterans Crisis Line. You can call and talk anonymously. The only time that it's no longer anonymous is when you're telling us, not us, I'm sorry, I just say the us is in the general sense, but that responder will only do a welfare check when you're sharing, I have a gun, it's to my head, I'm going to take action. Or this is my plan, I'm hanging up, I'm doing this after. So you've identified that you're a risk of hurting yourself. And we want to make sure that that's not the case. So if I could just put that in there quickly, but yes, the impulsive decision is when within an hour of someone having a thought and moving forward with the intent to die by suicide.
After we spoke, I did a little checking on this, and it said 73% of veterans die from firearms.
Correct.
53% non-veterans.
Right.
So as you said, we are comfortable.
Right.
We're comfortable with weapons. We had them. We're not afraid. We probably do have one in our home.
Right.
And it's imperative. And when I was at the Veteran Treatment Court, I could see there was more willingness to talk. That it wasn't, they weren't completely open, but there was more of a willingness. And I think it's people like you and what you've been doing that is making it more aware that it's not a sign of weakness. It is a real physical issue, PTSD, moving to suicide. It's a real physical thing, right? It's not oh, you're just weak.
No.
Wow.
And I do want to highlight too, like that 73% that use a firearm, it is 85 to 90% death rate compared to other means that are used for suicide, which is a fatality of 5%. So I've seen it where someone has tried to use carbon monoxide poisoning. Spouse came in, interfered, they were unconscious. First responders came, spent a week in the ICU, and they recovered. So that lethal means from that impulsive decision is so important. We know that 135 people approximately are affected by one suicide. And I do speak with a lot of folks that are the survivors of a loved one's death by suicide. And it's hard. You know, it's hard because that thought process, when someone feels like this is the decision, it's a place of pain, and I want to acknowledge that. But the protective factors and talking about a safety plan and how to prevent is the point that we like to stress in the suicide prevention, and we train other staff here at the VA those protective factors. And a great way to be a friend is, hey, what's happening when this is when you're experiencing this? What's your thoughts? Okay, what's your body feeling at this moment? And it's a way to make someone self-aware of themselves. I get depressed, I isolate, I become lonely, I sleep in, I have thoughts I'd be better off not waking up, my family is better without me. So you've started to identify those traits, those thoughts, those behaviors. And so, okay, what are fun things you enjoy? I like to take a walk with my dog. Okay, so we've identified a protective factor, your dog. I enjoy going to baseball games, or I enjoy whatever it may be. Okay, so when those things are happening to you, what is your plan? How are you going to counteract those thoughts? Give me a list of people you plan to call that you know are going to be there for you. So it's developing that support group, and it's helpful to write it out, but it's also helpful for you to be aware when it's happening.
It's having those quality relationships, that they can be veterans, they can be non-veterans. I watched the Dr. Summer Watson, the one who did her dissertation on veteran suicide. She sent me a thing to watch, Echoes from Afghanistan. 27 members died by suicide of their squad, platoon, battalion, the 7th Marines. And the ones who were back out, that was a thing that was a common thread. I don't have anyone to go to. I don't, because when you leave, you're very close, right, in the military. You got this bond, you know, and then you go home to wherever you're from, and they went home to wherever they're from, right? And so that connection gets lost. Initially, it's very strong, but it starts getting lost over time. And then how do you replace that? Who else can you bring into the fold, right? And that becomes a big deal. And I love you stating, have a support group and write it down. There's 45, I wrote a book, Business Secrets from the Battlefield to the Boardroom, which was with veterans. And in the research, we found 45,000 different nonprofits dedicated to helping veterans. So there's help out there.
Right. It's
out there. You have to reach out for it, right? You have to take action, take that first step, talk to someone like you. Go to the VA, at the Veterans Treatment Corps. We had a lot of guys that just, I don't trust the VA. Why not? Why don't you trust it?
There's different reasons. Some of it is hearsay. You know, it doesn't help when we've had unfortunate reports of documents that have just been tossed out, you know. I can't speak on those organizations, how they run things, but I always say give it a try, you know, have your own personal experience. And even if you've had a bad experience, talk it out. We have ways within the VA, if you have a complaint, you can go to the veteran advocate and you can make a complaint. You can also go to the White House hotline if you believe that your experience has just been horrible. Those are 2 good outlets to talk to. If you don't want to work with the VA, but you want people that have that veteran experience, go to a vet center. Just Google vet centers where you're at. When I lived in Maine, I went to a vet center. Every combat veteran goes in there. You're not going to get turned away. It's intended for combat veterans. I should make that point. So you go in, there's like 10 free sessions to focus on. If you have a significant other or a spouse, they do couples therapy. And there's also support groups within that set too. So there's opportunities out there. If you do have a service connection, If you have a service connection of 50% or higher, you would qualify for Care in the Community, CITC. It is a program where a veteran, or veteran's choice as it's also known as, you could go get your care outside of the VA. You could go find a provider. You know, I've done it as well, especially being an employee. I want to keep that privacy for myself. I work with a lot of the mental health staff, so, and some people are comfortable with it, and that's totally okay. It just depends on what your needs are. If you're looking just to talk to somebody, or grief counseling, but we do have people that are trained to work with veterans. We have more of a familiarity, whether it is a veteran counselor or a counselor, their exposure to different veterans' experiences is valuable. That will assist. It'll help them have that knowledge base and foundation. And a lot of veterans do come in. We work with the VA because we want to continue servicing. We also have peer support specialists. These are veterans, either they're disabled veteran from a circumstance. Some of them have overcome their substance abuse or addictions. So there's different ways to get care within the VA, and there's specific ways you can approach if you want to file a grievance. Again, veteran advocates, and then there's a White House line, or you can contact 988, press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. And if you want a referral to your local VA, a suicide prevention case manager, will do a follow-up, and we'll talk about what your needs are, and I will interact with that that team, and express your concerns, and so we will do that advocacy work on your behalf as well.
Wow.
So you're
That I didn't know. Is that okay? So veterans out there, people like Sam can be your advocate, can take your story, your concerns, your issues throughout the rest of the operation. Is that correct?
We can, like, what I do is I want to ask them, because it's always important to get the consent. Hey, it sounds like you have a lot of things that are hurting you, and you're stressed and you're worried about. Are you comfortable if I talk to your provider team on these circumstances? Most of the time, yeah, I'm not getting through. And so then I alert the team, whether it's face-to-face or over the phone, or our team's communications. So it is an opportunity for them to have that experience. If they want me to interact, I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we're just about out of time, Sam. Any last, you've given a wealth of knowledge here. Any last wealth of knowledge or wisdom you want to give?
So there's different ways you can contact the crisis line, the Veterans Crisis Line. There's the 988 press 1. We have a text feature, or they have a text feature. I just say we naturally.
That's fine. That's fine.
Veteran. So the text is 8382552. And we also have a way, if you don't want to text, you don't want to talk in person, you can go and chat online. And that is vetcrisisline.net/chat. So there's 3 different ways. If you're out and about, you don't want to talk to somebody, you could do a text, you could do a chat, or you could do over the phone. And if you're worried about a veteran, I had a recent experience where a Vietnam veteran called in because they were concerned. They didn't know how to interact with a veteran that served in Afghanistan. So he's like, hey, I notice he's isolating. Seems like he's giving away a lot of stuff, which is kind of an indicator.
Yes.
I don't know what to do here. Can someone give him a call? And they'll do a courtesy call, check in on him. And if they want a referral to us, they consent to it. Otherwise, a veteran will not get connected to a VA. So I think that's important to know too. We want to respect your privacy and space. The only time that we will be alerted is if you want to, or you've moved forward into an action of suicide. Then we want to value your life. We want to protect that. We want to take care of you and help in any means possible. Other than that, thank you for this opportunity.
Wow.
Thank
This has been amazing, and it's so important. It's particularly for veterans, but for anyone who's going through the depression and the isolation and the anxiety and the frustration, and it's increased dramatically since we went through COVID. That there's help out there, and there are people that will help.
Right.
But you got to reach out.
Yep.
And as I said, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Samantha one more time on how she used her extensive training as an interrogator to create safe havens for at-risk veterans. This is incredible. Now you can see this show on my podcast, which is called Life Altering Events, my YouTube channel, which is called Frank Zagardi. It'll be on Parade Deck, and I will send links to Sam, and she'll post them anywhere she can post them in her world. If you look at it through the YouTube channel, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Sam showed us where many, many of those rocks are. Join us again next week. We get into another life-altering event. Sam, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.